To the front, I have Mike Bromocamp, and while he's retired principal of Olson Phelan, has been actively involved with the company now called Akoya Go, which Mike will tell you a little bit about that. Greg Cash is Ardent International, where he's the board chair and CEO. Greg is also involved with a couple of other life science companies and on multiple boards. Sarah Odequist to my far left. Sarah is at Woodlands National Bank Board, where she's the chair, and also has been at Grand Casino. And then last but not least, to my left, the number 3 spot to the left, Shay Wiley. Shay's board chair at Zonatherm Products, and he's also a vice chair, soon to be board chair, at Park Industries, in addition to other boards. So those are our panelists. Mike, you're supposed to stay.
Yeah, I know. Must have been something he said. Rick, I want to tell everybody how excited I am to be here.
So it's tough when you know somebody so well that they, break all the rules that I put out there. That was off script, not something I would have okayed. But Mike did not give me the opportunity to okay it. Anyway, Mike, let's start with you. I introduced you, but tell everybody a little bit more. Oh, by the way, everybody's got their microphones. In fact, I'm going to skip you, Mike, because you're not ready to go. Greg, why don't you get a mic there too? Shay, you got yours. Sarah, let's go down there. We'll give Mike an opportunity to get his thoughts together. Sarah, tell us a little bit about you.
I don't know Rick as well, so I'm a rule follower. Good morning or good afternoon. Thank you, Rick, Clubby, and PDA for having me. As a governance, finance, and people strategist, this is a conversation that I love having. A bit more about me. I'm an attorney with experience in corporate finance and employment. I've been a COO, an acting CFO, and a CEO. And I'm currently a board chair, board director, and executive coach to CEOs. And my approach is governance first, systems driven, and people strategy.
Well, thank you for being here. Shay.
It's working?
Yeah,
great, thank you. First challenge accomplished. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see so many familiar faces. My background is to spend 27 years at General Mills, mostly in the international division, mostly running businesses around the world. Along the way, I did several expatriate assignments. My family and I have lived and worked in Mexico, South Africa, and Philippines. So a lot of travel, some challenging environments, but overall great career with a great company. Since I retired, I've served on several boards. I think I've done 7 boards at this point. I currently serve on 3 family-owned companies. Chair one, chair another, and on a third one. And I've served in a variety of roles, chair, committee chairs, etc. But along the way, I've also been involved several times in CEO transitions and succession planning. So looking forward to this discussion.
Shay has been kind enough to be a panelist a couple of times, and he didn't say that he's been involved with the Mill St. Margaret, and anybody who knows anything about the local high school community, 3 of my kids went to De La Salle, so he doesn't hold that against me, and he's been a great supporter of Clubby over the years, so welcome back, Shay. All right, Greg, tell us a little bit about your background.
I spent the first half of my career with large companies in the medical device industry, Medtronic, Watson Scientific, eventually U.S. Surgical. First in sales and marketing, like Shay, I did about 4 overseas assignments, UK, Hong Kong, Paris, and Milan. Worked for an Italian company which posed its own set of challenges I won't go into here. And ran a number of companies, all in the life sciences, then transitioned in consulting, and I've been on half a dozen boards. Currently I'm on 4 for-profit company boards, 2 in the US, 1 in Switzerland, 1 in Norway. I've been involved in CEO succession on a few occasions at have the opportunity to get into in a little more detail.
All right, Mike.
First thing I'll say is how proud I am to be here, that Rick actually did ask me to participate. We were an early sponsor of Club E right after its founding, and Rick and I have been great friends for many years. I retired in 2018. Started with Arthur Anderson in 75, was a auditor in a SEC company, controller at a debt collection agency, and then for 25 years I was a CPA with Olson Thielen here in the Twin Cities as a board member for both for-profit and non-profit organizations. When I was in practice, everything I was doing, nothing that I did as a CPA got me ready for my experience with succession planning. I did business valuation, I did litigation support, I was an auditor, tax planning, and none of it got me ready for what we're going to talk about today.
So let's start with that. Mike, tell us a little bit about the emergency CEO succession experience that you've had, and then the main takeaway from that.
I'm going to try and keep it together, Rick. I'm the oldest of 9 boys. My dad was an IBMer. We lived all over the country, and the boys, all of us were entrepreneurial in some way, shape, or form. My 4th brother owned a SaaS company providing financial and grant accounting services to foundations all over the world. We had about 250 clients, Rick.
Yeah, close enough.
Couple dozen employees. Just a few months after I retired, my brother had a traumatic brain injury out in Denver, riding one of these electric scooters without a head protection on, and basically was in a coma. Payroll was due on Wednesday. My sister-in-law was one of his employees, and she came to me and said, "What are we going to do?" And oh, by the way, he did not have any power of attorney. He was married. That did us no good. And we actually ended up having to go to the court here in Hennepin County and getting a conservatorship so that we could run the company. So in effect, I was the informal succession plan for my brother, of which I had no intention of being able to handle. So our first question was, do we let the company die? Do we let it continue to limp along? It wasn't particularly well managed, or what we were going to do with the rest of it. We applied for a full conservatorship, cost us $25,000 to $30,000 to do that, and then we had to figure out where we were going to go from there. Is that enough, Rick? Or do you want me to keep going?
No, that tells everybody why you're here. I would say that Mike called a group together in the conference room at Olson Thielen, and there was, I don't know, about 8 of us in the room, or 6, and I was the only one who said, "Hey, got a lot here, I don't think we should throw it in the garbage can." And there were a couple other people who weekly supported that position, and then Mike asked me to step in, and we brought in a CEO and did a variety of things, and him being a little choked up is understandable because his brother, frankly, they thought he was going to die for a couple of months, and he's made a miraculous recovery, and also the company's doing great, and his brother has financially come out of this in a very good position. So anyway, thank you for being here, Mike. Greg, tell us a little bit about your background, why you're here, and what struck me when we spoke about it is you've led a couple of CEO searches. Tell us about that and your key observations.
So we had a situation where we had a longtime CEO who suddenly announced his retirement. So this isn't going to be much about succession planning, and I'll tell you why. He was old school. The culture was very unique. There were certain aspects that we needed to preserve while others not. We needed a new leader who would not disrupt the positive aspects while implementing change on the less than positive aspects. For example, the CEO had 12 direct reports and resisted hiring a COO, so therefore there was no successor. He kept his cards pretty close to the vest and told the board only what he thought he had to. I was asked by the board chair at the time to lead the search committee, so I suggested we use a well-known search firm to do a nationwide search. We had to keep a tight timeline because he basically gave us 6 months notice, and we narrowed the list to 4 candidates and then brought in who we all brought in, then the 2 finalists. One was local, the other was about 1,000 miles away, and it was kind of a situation where there was one choice that he was either going to be a wildly successful guy or he was going to crash and burn. And then the other wasn't really my top choice at the beginning, but became my top choice because he was local, he understood the culture, he had worked in that area before, and we thought he would fit in better. And so that was who we hired. And that was 3 years ago. I've since become the board chair, worked very closely with him, and he was clearly the right choice. He's done very well. He's consolidated the number of direct reports to 6. He hired a de facto COO and implemented a strategic plan, which he had never had up to that time, or if we did, it was collecting dust on a shelf somewhere, and began to implement the change that needed to be implemented.
Great, well, thanks for being here, Greg. Shay, let's go to you next. You've worn many different hats at different boards under different circumstances. In one situation, you were on the board, then stepped into the CEO role, and then went back to the board. Describe that situation and a couple of the lessons that you learned.
Yeah, sure. So I was serving as vice chair, going to become chair at the time, and all of a sudden as a board, we found ourselves without a CEO. A sudden departure. It was never a good time, but this happened to be a really busy time. And so as a board, I can tell you we were not ready. We did not have a succession plan in place. We didn't know who was going to fill in, even on an emergency basis. And I always joke that the rest of the board seemed to take a step back, and all of a sudden I found myself in there. And, so I think lesson number one is pay attention to what the rest of the board are doing. But it was actually a great experience. Thinking back on it, one of the great things we did was we decided together that I would step off the board and step into the CEO role. So that was important because I now had a different job to do. I had to run the business and try and keep the train on the tracks. Equally, the board had a very important role and a very important job to do. They had to find a real CEO real fast. And so that worked out really well for us. The board did their job very well, hired a great CEO. I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but I'm a big believer in quick transitions. And so we transitioned very quickly, and I went back onto the board to allow the CEO to take his role. And shortly thereafter became chair. And so, and I think having sat in the CEO seat made me a better chair. But I would like to think it also helped the new CEO in having a chair who actually understood the challenges that he's going through. So in terms of lessons learned, I think there's two things. First of all, the importance of succession planning. You don't want to be in a situation like that where you're scrambling and trying to get anybody to fill the seat for you. And the second thing that a lot of people don't think about is the importance of having an updated job profile for the CEO aligned to your strategy. In those first couple of weeks, you don't want to be wasting time trying to align the board on what it is we want in a CEO and give to a recruiter to get the search started. You want to be ready to go. Apart from the fact that, of course, it can help with talent development as well. But I think that was really the second big lesson, to have that job profile updated all the time and ready to go.
Great, well, thanks, Shay. Thanks for being here. Sarah, last but not least, you've been on several boards, been involved in several CTO searches. When we spoke, you told me that you believed it was essential to stay close to the CEOs, both before the search and post-search with the new CEO. Tell us a little bit about why that's important to you and how you went about doing it.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. In my 20 years of board service as a board chair, board director, comp chair, non-gov chair, I've been involved in at least 6 CEO transitions and probably twice as many senior leadership transitions. What I've learned is the board needs to stay close enough to know, but independent enough to govern, and that's really important. Before a transition, staying close to the CEO so that you can understand the talent landscape is important. It takes trust and it takes time with the CEO to build that process, and it shouldn't start when the search process starts. Otherwise, transitions can create uncertainty, erode trust, distractions. before the process even begins. So for example, if you're someone here on the board and you don't have a succession plan and you don't have a good relationship with the CEO and you head back and start this discussion about succession planning, the CEO might think this is a Minnesota nice way of saying go look for another job. So you definitely want to have those good relationships and have high trust. After a transition, it's really important to stay engaged so that you can align expectations, support the onboarding, and catch issues early before they become bigger problems. And really, you want to capitalize on the momentum that can come from this transition. It's not about managing the CEO, it's about building trust, staying visible on what's happening, and providing informed oversight. And that's what you need to be able that's what you get from having a close relationship to the CEO and paying attention to the talent landscape.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, opening it up to the panel, whoever would like to jump in first, and we'll roll from there. Gold standard in the succession process means different things to different people. There's success criteria, there's evaluating the candidates, there's running the plan, et cetera, et cetera. But share one or two things that you think should be part of the gold standard for succession planning. Greg, it looks like you're ready to go.
Yeah, so I think you need to start with the vision, mission, and values. Skills, key skills should complement them. Then current areas of need should also be considered. Candidate evaluation really based on those things and cultural fit. The transition plan really is dependent on the situation. Too much overlap is not recommended, in my opinion, between a sitting CEO and a new CEO. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail, but make sure you allow adequate time to find a successor.
I would just add to that I think it's important to recognize that, number one, this is a key responsibility of the board. So it's important to have a collaborative effort across the board, but that the process is led by the board. And by all means involve the CEO if possible, but the process should be led by the board. In terms of candidate evaluation, I think it's something that's got to be ongoing. Gold standard is, of course, that you get to work at this over many, many years and evaluate candidates. I think one of the blind sides that boards can have is we only get to see these candidates infrequently, and so I think there's a danger there that you could get misled almost in terms of the true quality and true leadership. So I think it's important from a gold standard perspective to, as a board, really dig deeper and look beyond the results, look beyond the intelligent articulation of plans and really dig deep into true leadership and strategy. And then in terms of transition, as I mentioned earlier, in my mind, gold standard is quick. There can only be one CEO at a time. So a former CEO, in my mind, has to be off-site, out of the office. Otherwise, everybody's just going to keep going to them. Let the new CEO get on with it.
I won't add to what others have said. The thing that I think is important or can be really helpful is for it not to be a standalone plan. So succession planning isn't just about hiring a CEO. You need to integrate it. It's a human capital strategy. You pair it with compensation, with evaluation, with leadership development. As Shay mentioned, if you are engaging in leadership development and paying attention throughout the year, encouraging the CEO, have those high performers report to the board, come to the board meetings. Let's not figure this all out when it's time to look for a CEO. So it really is a human capital strategy. It's all of it. It's evaluations, it's compensation, making sure that we are incentivizing the things that we want long term, because you're right, once the succession planning is starting, you're going to have a dog and pony show that looks a lot different than if you've been sort of paying attention all along.
I agree with most of the comments that have been made here. I would emphasize, particularly from my perspective, the gold standard is unique to your organization and you have to make it so. If compensation is an issue, that's one thing, but the fact is in our situation, I was the de facto CEO because I didn't have any place else ago. And I actually did make an offer to an internal candidate that called me back the day later and said, no, can't do that. I'm just not equipped to be able to do that. In our situation, we were able to find a candidate with Rick's help that fit the needs of our organization specifically and uniquely. And that's the only comment I would make to add.
So there are many reasons to conduct a CEO search and to go through this process. Not a trick question, but how do you know that the time is right?
It's really dependent on the situation at the company. I'll give a couple examples. If you're transitioning from product development, or in the case of life sciences, clinical study, to commercialization, maybe that's the time to move from a technical founder to someone with more of a commercial orientation. Another example might be if a company's going from startup to medium size. So an entrepreneurial mindset to maybe a CEO that has more process and discipline orientation than entrepreneurship.
I agree with what Greg said. I think it's very much a case of different horses for different courses, and it seems to me anyway that most of the time you actually don't have a choice. There's never a good time to do a CEO transition, and a lot of times you don't have a choice. Either the person leaves or the founder wants to retire, or whatever. But in those planned situations, I think it is a question of evaluating where we're at in the cycle. And look, the board's primary role is to look forward. And results are great for context, but our job is to look forward. And at the point that you're not seeing the CEO also looking forward enough, I think that's certainly a milestone for you to think about.
I was going to say, I look at this a little bit differently, and that you have to look at all the people that are affected by the company. In our case, we were trying to make decisions based upon our employees. We were trying to make them on the basis of our clients. We were trying to make them on the basis of vendors. Investors, of course, we had none to deal with, but we knew we were going to have people to deal with. You got to take a look at the circumstances that you're in and decide, what's going to be important to you and who are you going to affect. For a public company, you got to go all the way to the shareholders and find out what they're looking for. I watch in the media here about Target and Medtronic and some of these other companies. Sometimes it's not clear to me where they're looking for that stuff. But in every one of the cases that the four of us have had to deal with, they're all different. And the uniqueness of those organizations are going to dictate exactly how you want to conduct that search. In my case, existence was where we were at. And the good thing was that I was a board of one to make that initial decision. Thank God I had people like Rick here that were able to get involved in my advisory group. It would have been real easy for me to throw up my hands and say, let's go to hell, let's let this thing go. As a business valuation specialist, I knew we could create value with this company. And in the end, we created enough value in this company to basically sell my brother's shares off and provide him with financial stability for his lifetime. And his expenses are significant. And Rick can evaluate that further if you need to. There's a lot of reasons to do it, but you have to look at all your shareholders, all your stakeholders, is what I meant to say.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Sarah?
Oh, I don't have anything extra to add.
Nothing extra to add. All right. Next question. How do you all think boards can potentially either overreach or underreach relative to this topic?
Well, overreach, I was thinking more in general terms of directors. Overreach, a lot of new directors treat board meetings as business reviews, especially if they've come from a large company. Whereas, their job, as Shay just brought up, is to focus forward and look at strategy. Underreach, I've seen a lot, particularly in founder-led organizations where, board members don't hold them accountable and they say, oh, it's his or her company. And they don't treat it as if, all the other stakeholders matter.
Sarah, you got something to add?
Yeah, I would say definitely undermining the incoming CEO authority. Or I've been on boards where I I know you've been a CEO, but now you're on the board seat, and sometimes that can be hard. And if you're a board chair in here, I really, really encourage you, that is your job to have a conversation with that board member. Sometimes it's just a transition that folks need to make when they switch over to the board. I think the Underreach is similar to that, avoiding tough conversations, hoping things will change. You don't have to wait for certainty. You'll see the pattern, recognize that there's a pattern, have a conversation. Again, although I was born here, I grew up in the South, and I'm very familiar with Minnesota nice, which I think is lovely. But at times, you do have to have a conversation with people. And the truth is, it makes your board better. At the end of it, it makes it better. At first, it's hard. At first, it's difficult. But boards definitely at times can overreach and underreach. And as a board member, even if you're not the chair, helping the board helps the company.
Yeah, at PDA, we often use the term noses in, fingers out. And that's really the overreach, underreach. But specific to succession planning, I think there's a risk for a board to overreach in going too deep in the organization, in the talent review and in succession planning. You would hope that your CEO has a good talent development, succession planning process in place for the organization anyway. But the board is primarily interested in CEO succession planning. So ideally the board is looking at the executive team. Maybe if there's a couple of people that we should be on our radar a little deeper in the organization, that's great, we should pay attention there. But generally speaking, we should not be going any lower in the organization than the executive team. Otherwise it's overreach. So we should not, as a board, be doing full-on talent review, talent development, succession planning for the organization. In terms of underreach, it's the opposite. Too many boards don't pay any attention to succession planning. And again, remember, if you think of the key responsibilities of a board, is ensuring you have a good CEO in place and held accountable, that you've got a strategy, and that you've got a succession plan. They're the three key responsibilities of any board. So you have to engage, but be careful not to overreach.
Mike, anything you want to add?
Only that in the board experiences that I've had, the boards tend to be way too procedural about how they go through this and do not bring creativity to the table as to where they're going in the future. I think the mistake has been that it's been based on what we've done before, who we've done it before too, and who we're doing it going forward with. Creativity on the part of the board is something that I think needs to be encouraged and fostered.
So regarding in an emergency succession plan, what's the one thing that you'd like to share with the audience about that? Or is there a document that you think should be prepared, or what's the one takeaway regarding emergency planning for boards?
Yeah, I would say have a succession plan in place. Now, companies are different. Large companies, they're going to have probably several people ready to go at a moment's notice. Smaller companies, family-owned companies, you typically don't have that luxury. You don't have the bench strength. You may be working on 5-year plans as opposed to next-day plans. So you don't always have somebody ready to go. But I would say, if you don't have a full-on succession plan in place, at least have an emergency succession plan, a business interruption plan in place. Know who you're going to tap into on day one. Or I would say know a couple of people that you're going to tap into, because circumstances can change and people may not be capable or willing or able to act on the day that you need them to act. But have a couple of people in place and that you're going to tap into on day one.
And I might add to that, boards need to be held accountable as well as CEOs, right? So, you should have a board assessment tool, and that assessment tool should identify skill sets, and it would also, bring to light any of the directors that could succeed a CEO if necessary as part of emergency planning, and then of course, a succession plan.
I agree with Greg.
Sarah?
I would agree with the emergency succession plan. Any board that I chair, we have an emergency succession plan, because I don't plan to wake up one morning and start running a company. So that is almost always the first thing that we start working on. Shay mentioned a good point, which is some companies are large enough that you can say one person. One of the companies that I'm with, it's a smaller company, and one person couldn't do it well. And so the emergency succession plan names 2 people, and then it specifically names in detail sort of who gets to make decisions about what. It also says that first, I think within, I can't remember, 24 or 48 hours, me as the board chair and those 2 people meet, and it lays out how often we meet, when we meet with the board, and it really gives a lot of structure in those first couple weeks. Who talks to who makes what calls, who's in charge of the vendor management, just all of that, because I don't want to be woken up in the middle of the night and then try to figure out, wait, who did I think could do this? I don't want to do that. Like, I want that. And it's not hard, and we can change it. You can, there's lots of ways to do it, but the takeaway is do it.
All right, so shifting gears to lightning round, I got a number of questions on that, so I'm looking for a short answer, a word, a phrase, sentence or 2. Don't get up from the podium and go for the hug. The intention here is to cover a fair amount of ground. All right. Do you have a personal golden rule for CEO succession planning? And if so, what is it?
Just do it. What's the commercial on TV it's going to be? Just do it. And I would dare say that our experience with the 4 of us that are up here, my guess is it's not being well done in many, many cases.
Is that based on our answers? Not so much succession planning, but make sure you choose the right person and you take the time to do it. Don't act quickly and choose the wrong person.
Yeah, I would say start early, have a consistent process that runs through the year and every year, and engage the CEO.
I would just remind folks that succession planning is a governance responsibility. Like, that is what we're there. CEO oversight is one of the most important things we do as a board. And if we're not paying attention to this, I argue we're not doing our job. And so make sure that we're working on it. And what I would like to remind people is it's not just an HR problem. If you don't have a good CEO, it's a company problem. It affects value, it's risk.
How about one non-negotiable that you believe every board should implement, and we'll even put a timeline out there by the end of the quarter, so the next month and a half. What's one non-negotiable?
Make sure there's a succession plan in place.
Yeah, I would say build it into your work plan for the year for the board. It's easy for a year to go by and all of a sudden you realize, well, we didn't do anything about that. So put it on your work plan, and if you don't have it there already, do it.
Mine's not a lot different. If you don't have a plan, get a plan, or make sure, as he mentioned, that there's a work plan or agenda when you're going to get it done by. If you have a plan, make sure you've tested it. So you can have a fire plan, but if you're not having fire drills, you don't know where the gaps are. And so again, if you haven't tested it, test it, and if you haven't, then put it on an agenda. I set my alarm on my clock every morning when I get up for all my meetings. If I didn't do that, it wouldn't get done. So same thing with agendas, topics, figure out if you're not going to get it done in the next quarter, how are you going to make sure you do get it done?
How about a communication plan? What's one thing that a communication plan should have?
I mean, again, it's dependent on if you're a public company or a private company. I know we're a private company group, but Reg FD comes into play where you have to simultaneously let everyone know. If you're a private company, you start with the board and the investors. You move to anybody that you have a fiduciary responsibility to, creditors, lenders, then employees, then customers.
Yeah, I would say it's an essential part of a business interruption plan or an emergency succession plan. I think we've got to remember always that a transition, especially a CEO transition, can be very traumatic for an organization, especially if the CEO has been long-standing. And so there's a real risk that you'll have organization paralysis very, very quickly. So speaking from experience, I think what's really important is get your employees really quickly with clear communication, here's the plan, and we're moving forward.
I would agree. It's not just about the plan, it's about being prepared, and we owe it to our employees, to all of our stakeholders, and for us to be able to step right in very quickly with a plan that creates confidence, calms people. That's what I want to do as a board member. I don't want to be in a situation where I'm like, sorry, we didn't get to it.
I agree with Sarah says. Although transparency seems to be lacking in our industry more than it's being pushed, and I think that you do have to make sure those stakeholders are taken care of.
Have you found there to be a particular red flag that the supposedly ready now successor shows that they are not ready? This person you think is the person, any flags that have taught you that maybe they aren't ready?
Lack of transparency and poor communication to the board.
Yeah, apart from results, I guess, it's what I mentioned earlier. It's digging a little deeper, and it's typically authentic leadership and lack of strategy. But it's really kind of getting to, is this person really authentic? It's the what and the how. It's not just what they're doing; it's how they're doing it. Or smarts and hearts. I like to think of what and how and smarts and hearts. That's what it's about.
I would say lack of experience or inability to handle or lead through complexity. Being a CEO is a never-ending fire hose pace of prioritizing, delegating, dealing with issues. And if you haven't done that, or if you show that you don't do it well, it's not going to work out.
I might just add in one of the biggest mistakes I made early in my career was putting someone into a role that I thought they would grow into. That's about the last thing you want to do with a CEO.
And at all that, I might observe that internal candidates have one bad step in front of them sometimes because they are products of the environment in which they're being brought into. And in many cases, I would favor an external candidate over an internal candidate. But that would just be me. I would say that the boards that I've worked with over my career are more successful bringing external candidates in that have the skills that they need to take them to the next step.
All right, so we're into the finish line, try to hit the 1 o'clock timeline. Wrap up question. What is one thing that you'd like the audience to take away from today's session?
That would be an easy one for me. It's the first thing I wrote down when we looked at these questions. Do not accept the status quo as being golden. You need to be creative, you need to be open-minded, and you need to be talking to your fellow board members so that you understand where you're trying to go and how you get there.
Yeah, you really need to focus on the future as much, if not more, than on the present. So, you're hiring for the next 5 years, not necessarily for the next 4 quarters.
Yeah, I'd say just remember CEO succession planning is a key responsibility of the board. If you're not doing it, you need to be doing it.
They've taken all of my answers. Because I'm a lawyer, and so I think it's fiduciary duty. And so, because I look around this room and I think it's not about figuring out how to do the plan, it's doing the plan. And so I look around and I think if we're not doing it, it's not that we can't figure it out, it's just that we're not prioritizing it. And it's kind of like insurance and hoping that we don't need it, and then if you don't have it in place when something happens, well, it can be super costly. So find the time, make the priority, convince your colleagues, whatever it takes, make a commitment today to do the right thing.
All right, last question, a little bit more of a personal question, but if you had a chance to tell your younger self one thing about business, what would it be?
Although you learn a lot of stuff in business school, it does not prepare you for the business world.
I would say, results are important, deadlines are important, but at the end of the day, it's all about people. So be authentic, build relationships, build trust, and it'll go okay.
This is kind of fun, paying attention to how I think that people are going to answer based on their. So I would tell myself to capitalize on my natural ability to deliver hard truths in a way that people will trust me, keep listening, and feel respected. I've learned that clear, thoughtful respect, the honesty builds credibility. And again, as I mentioned earlier, in the end, it's better. So I just remind myself to go ahead and do that, even though things I often say aren't super popular in a room. But if I can learn how to say them in a way that's respectful, it really helps the company.
I would like to get a transcript of that. Sarah's right on. The one thing I would like to have told myself was do the right thing. Always do the right thing. And it has served me very well. I may not be the smartest bulb on the planet, but I am the most honest guy in the room. And I will tell you what you need to hear. And I can tell you that my clients appreciated that during the time I was there. And I think boards would perform at the top if they were doing the same thing. And unfortunately, that is not always the case.
I do agree with that. Reminder, you need a sticker for your parking ticket, everybody. The next PDA event is June 16th, Co-Thinking at the Board Level, Preserving Judgment in an AI-Shaped Environment. And AI also is our next Club E, which is in September 10th. We're going to be talking about using AI to sell more. So let's thank our panelists.